Hi, my name is Maxwell Sankwich. I'm going to be presenting on Josephine Bonaparte. Her early life. She was born Marie Josephe Rose Thatcher de la Pigueri. Josephine Bonaparte went by many names in her life. She was most notably known as Josephine Bonaparte because of her connections with Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of France. We'll get into that later. She was born June 23rd, 1763, in Martinique, which is near Paris. Her father was Joseph Tascher de la Bulgaria, and her mother was Rose Claires de Vergers de Senois. She grew up in a wealthy household because her mother came from a long line of old family money. And Josephine would die in May 29th, 1814. Josephine was married twice in her life. Her first marriage was to Alexandre François Marie Vicomte de Béarnais. Originally, he did not choose Josephine to be his wife. Josephine Bonaparte was living with her aunt Marie Euphemie Desiree Renaudin at the time, and she was a mistress of Alexandre's father, François de Béarnais. François had um, Alexander with his wife at the time, and then left that kid to live with Josephine's aunt, Josephine herself, and Josephine's cousin. In 1776, Alexandra came of age to be married, and Marie Euphemie decided that it would be best for her own claims and power if he married one of her nieces. Originally, it was decided that Catherine Desiree, Josephine's cousin, was going to marry him because she was 15 and she was closest in age to Alexandria at the time. However, Catherine died before that they could actually tie the knot. And so on December 13th, 1779, Alexandre wed 12-year-old Josephine. They had two children, Eugenie de Béarnais, a son, and Hortense de Béarnais, a daughter. Those were actually the only two children that Josephine Bonaparte would have in her life. The marriage did not last very long because it was a very unhappy marriage. Okay, so her main marriage was to Napoleon Bonaparte, most important. Napoleon was working on becoming the Emperor of France, and so Josephine is thus considered the Empress of France. The two met in 1795, and Josephine actually became Napoleon's mistress for a while until they married in March 9th, 1796. It's been noted that on Napoleon's deathbed, Josephine was the last name that came out of his mouth. And it is well known that Josephine Bonaparte was Napoleon's true love. However, his family did not approve of the marriage because he was a very powerful French military leader on the way to becoming Emperor of France. And she was a widow with two children from a different husband, which was very frowned upon at the time. However, Josephine, for however much that Napoleon loved her, she did not love him the same and engaged in an affair with Hippolyte Charles, while Napoleon was off on a military expedition leading the French army into Italy. This would permanently change the dynamics of the marriage because it would make it so that Napoleon would have his own affairs because prior to this, neither of them had any affairs with any women, which was, I might say, unheard of. And then the marriage was eventually annulled in 1810, mainly due to the fact that Josephine Bonaparte was not able to give her husband any heirs. The two children she had with Alexandre truly were her only children she was able to conceive. One important event that Josephine Bonaparte was a part of was the Reign of Terror. Rising tensions at home and a lot of military defeats led to the creation of what's known as the Committee of Public Safety, and it was headed by Maximilien Robespierre. He believed that this reign of terror was necessary to preserve French liberties, The Civil War was spreading, and hostile armies were starting to um, surround France. And so there were a lot of great efforts being made to kind of indoctrinate people to Republican culture. And a big part of this idea was that there was concern of people being within France's borders that were against the revolutionary government. And the Committee on Public Safety and Robespierre both thought it was very important to kind of arrest and then eventually execute by the guillotine those suspected of crimes against the revolution. Joséphine Bonaparte actually was one of those who was suspected. It was mainly because of the actions of her first husband, Alexandre. He was arrested March 2nd, 1794, for crimes against the revolution. And then an arrest warrant was produced April 21st, 1794, against Joséphine, and she would actually be imprisoned in the Carmes prison, the same as Alexandre, until her release in July 28th, 1794, a day after the end of the Reign of Terror. Joséphine was also involved in the plot of the Rue Saint-Nicaise. It was actually an assassination attempt against her husband at the time, Napoleon. It was not the only assassination attempt, and it was not the last assassination attempt. Napoleon Bonaparte was the first consul of the French Republic at the time, and um, they were both at a theater, and Napoleon was supposed to drive back in a car, but Napoleon got mad at Joséphine during the play that they were watching, and so he darted off in a carriage, followed by security. And then Joséphine chased after him, and so she was followed in a separate carriage with her sister and a few other security guards, and they rode right past Napoleon's car. Little did they know that there was an explosive device planted in the car with a timer on it, and Napoleon was able to go right past it to safety. But just as the bomb exploded, Josephine's carriage was right next to it, and so her carriage felt the brunt of it. There were no major casualties or anything like that, just some injuries to Joséphine. But it is an interesting historical thing there. So, a big part of Joséphine's contribution to history were her aesthetic choices. She incurred a large national debt because she always was purchasing new expensive art pieces, and she was spending all this money so that she could keep herself at the front of the artistic scene, which she very much was at this time. Her choices led to large contributions to imperial design as well as to what kind of the overall design of the French Empire was. Um, she commissioned art pieces that were commemorating important victories of Napoleon and just kind of solidifying him as a very powerful leader of France. And moreover, she was a very famous tastemaker. All of her choices, her artistic choices, her style choices, all of those decisions that she made were kind of seen as what everybody else needs to be doing. So if she thought that this certain fabric was in, everybody else knew that that fabric had to be in at the moment. And she also very much promoted French luxury superiority for the manufacturers, which was a big part back then. And almost more importantly, she promoted a lot of artistic expression and a lot of artistic ideas from the Renaissance into the French government, which would largely show continuities on that. These are the bibliographies for the sources that I have compiled. Britannica, Wikipedia, National Geographic, and NapoleonHistoricalSociety.org. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.